Very well. How are you?
I'm doing as well, good as well. Thank you. Thanks a lot for
Excellent.
taking time and talking to me today.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
so, Before we start, I would like to request you to introduce yourself, what do you do, and the journey that you have taken to reach where you are, and that has led to you doing whatever it is that you're doing.
Okay. These days I'm an author and I guess a creativity consultant expert. I write books about creativity and innovation, and I write fiction. Um, for love, for money, I lead workshops and do talks on creativity and innovation, especially anti-conventional thinking, a new approach to creativity, which we'll be talking about later. Um, and I do a bit of consulting. The path that got me here is a long and rather convoluted one. I'm an artist by training. Over the years, I've variously been a teacher. I've done photography work. I've been in advertising. I set up one of Bangkok's first internet multimedia companies. I had an idea management company in Belgium. I worked for the European Commission. I've done all kinds of things, which I think is a benefit in that I've lived in a lot of places. I've seen a lot of things, and it gives me a lot of insights which are useful when it comes to being creative. I suppose the journey that brought me to where I am today is when I was younger, I began to realize I was different to other people. Even as I grew into adolescence and adulthood, I still had a crazy child's imagination, whereas friends around me seemed to be growing more serious and had an ability to come up with ideas, and other people thought that was incredible. I mean, it was just the way my mind works. And so at a certain point, I became curious: why am I and a few other people, particularly in the arts and communities, find it so easy to have ideas, whereas so many people seem to find it challenging to have ideas? Is there something fundamentally different about the way my mind functions? And if so, is there something that I can learn from that and teach to others? So that sort of led me into I've spent basically the past 10 years focusing on creativity and innovation, and I think I've come close to understanding a lot of what's going on there. And yeah, anti-conventional thinking is part of that. And yeah, we'll get to that later, so I won't spoil it now.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I share a little bit of background with you as well.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
I've had a very convoluted route to where I am today as well. In my 18 years of professional life, I've done almost about everything that you can think about in a business. I've done
great.
sales, I've done marketing, I've done business development, product development, administration, finance, collection, branding, franchisee management, production planning, logistics planning, outsourcing, IT, selling services, selling products. I mean, I've done almost everything that you can think of that happens in a business. I ran my own business
Fantastic.
as well for a couple of years. So I
Great.
understand completely where when you say that having all of these experiences actually it gives you the ability to connect a lot of dots and kind of be able to come up with ideas. So that's again
Indeed.
something which I like as well. I've written a book as well. I've
Great.
tried to be a little creative when it comes to the book. It's a business book, but I've written it in the format of a poem.
Oh,
So
excellent. Very good.
yeah. So by the way, I got to know you from the newsletter that you sent out. It's called Report 103. I've been
Hmm.
a subscriber of it for almost about a year and a half and two, where you talk about a lot of things that you write and you talk about the anti-conventional thinking. So before we get to the anti-conventional thinking, I would like to ask you, the name of the newsletter. I mean, Report 103. I mean, what kind of a name is that?
It's sort of a puzzle actually, because it's a newsletter on um, creativity, imagination, ideas, and innovation. And the first letters of those are CII, which is the Roman number for 103.
Ah, okay. So that's the story behind Report 103.
Yeah,
Interesting.
exactly.
Interesting. That gives a totally different perspective to the newsletter itself. Because when you don't know this, it's kind of puzzling as to what does this mean. I mean, there has to be some meaning, but you don't understand what the meaning is. So
No,
we've mentioned. Yeah, please go on.
I was gonna say no. People often ask me about that, especially in the earlier days of the newsletter.
So we did mention anti-conventional thinking, right? So what
Hmm.
is anti-conventional thinking?
Well, anti-conventional thinking is something that I came up with in response to the flaws of brainstorming. I became rather frustrated few years ago with brainstorming as a creativity process. As you probably know, brainstorming has kind of become the norm in businesses when you need ideas, which is fine, except that brainstorming is actually not very good at coming up with creative ideas. And I became rather frustrated by that. I felt that it was particularly ridiculous in an industry of creativity. People are continuing to use something because that's just the way we've always done it. That irritated me. And also, as someone coming from an art and writing background, I realized that the way that artists and writers and scientists and so on collaborate on creative projects is actually very different to brainstorming. And so I looked, into research why brainstorming doesn't work, so the growing research into what happens inside the brain when people try to solve problems, and then particularly try to model it after the way that a group of artists or writers or scientists might collaborate on a particular project. I came up with something called anti-conventional thinking, and as its name implies, it's basically about being purposely unconventional, rejecting conventional thinking in favor of unconventional thinking in the creative process. And it's a way of kind of training your mind to reject conventional thinking. Maybe it's best if I try and explain a little bit. Okay, best way to do this. What I'd like you and anyone listening to this broadcast to do is to think of a talk you've recently had with a friend, a chat you've had with a friend. Think about what you said and where you were, what was happening in the background, what the situation smelled like. And then imagine as you're having this conversation, a cat walks past, looks up to you and says, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a mouse go by?" So what all is happening there, and why is this relevant to anti-conventional thinking? Well, it comes down to the way the mind remembers stuff and recalls those memories. Now, basically, as you go through life having this conversation with a friend, or hopefully in talking with me and the other people you interview on these podcasts, reading stuff, forming opinions, etc., it's basically your mind is forming memories. But the mind is not like a long, film strip of your life, a film of your life where you can kind of rewind to a particular part and play it back again. Basically, what happens is as you remember stuff, your mind breaks these memories down to little tiny chunks, which I call notions. And it stores these notions in a very organized way in your mind, so that similar notions are close together. So the notions about your friend over here, and about cats over here, and maybe your sweetheart over here, and practical stuff. So it's all very kind of structured. So similar information is stored in similar places. And when you remember something, basically a mechanism in your mind, and no one actually knows exactly how this mechanism works or why it works, but thank goodness it does work, because this is how our memory and creativity works. Some mechanism in your mind can basically pull the various notions necessary to reconstruct this memory and stick them together so that you can recall the memory. So if you come from a software background or a web background, it's kind of like dynamic web pages where information is pulled out of a very complex database and strung together for you to recall it. Now, when you first thought about this conversation with a friend, you probably immediately thought about the friend and the conversation. And then as I asked you a couple more questions, this mechanism had to go and find more notions to make the memory more in depth. And like the last true part of the conversation was smell. And I'm sure that's something you didn't think about unless the conversation had to do with smell until I asked you about it. But presumably your mind was still able to pull up the relevant notions and remind you, if you'd been in a restaurant, maybe the smells of the restaurant came to mind. And then lastly, just for fun, I threw a cat, a talking cat into the picture. And even though I assume that didn't happen in the conversation you had with your friend, you could still visualize that and kind of put that into this conversation. It seems that basically the same mechanism is at work when you form ideas. The same mechanism in your mind takes notions and puts them together and tries to come up with a solution to a problem or a goal or whatever. And whenever you bring two or more notions together to create something that, as far as your own mind is concerned, is novel and new, that's a creative idea. And that creative idea then becomes part of the notions that you can construct future notions with. And that's the process of being creativity. Being creative, of course, is bringing these notions together. In addition, when you're being creative, there's another part of your mind that is particularly in most people becomes extremely active, and this corresponds to a part of the dorsolateral prefrontal region in the brain. And in the mind, I like to call it the mental bureaucrat. This is kind of the very stern guy who looks and watches all the thoughts that go past and basically stops stuff that's inappropriate. And generally this is good because the mental bureaucrat is sort of what ensures that we conform to the norms of society, that um, you know you behave, and in the office you behave in a certain way. On a hot day you don't show up you don't show up at a business office in a swimsuit because it's hot and a swimsuit be more
So,
comfortable. Your mental
so
bureaucrat
it
says
plays
no, that's not appropriate.
so it plays the
um,
part of a filter basically, which kind of
yeah, it's
helps
basically
us.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a filter that filters behavior, and like I say, it's a good thing. But it's also what tends to inhibit thinking in a lot of people because imagine you're in a meeting with a group of people, a group of accountants and business people. It's kind of a dull meeting, and suddenly a crazy idea comes to mind. Now, the thing with crazy ideas is, for the most often, it's hard to know initially, are these crazy ideas like crazy very creative or crazy stupid? And the mental bureaucrat will probably say, crazy stupid. Don't say anything there. Keep it to yourself. And this is what inhibits a lot of creativity in people. And what's interesting is that in people who are naturally very creative, like artists, composers, and so on, this mental bureaucrat doesn't function so well. And this is one reason why it's easier for them to have creative ideas, is because this thing that normally stops them is not working so well. So all kinds of stuff comes out, and that's not only why they have crazy ideas, but I think it's also why often artists, composers, seem a bit eccentric, because this filter that makes most people conform more to the norms of society isn't working so well for them. So they kind of do their own thing based on their own logic. Now, it still functions for them. If this completely doesn't work, then and there's been a few cases of people who have damaged dorsal prefrontal regions, then they just sort of lose all notions of what's suitable in society, and it can be violent, dangerous, whatever. But that's going to extremes. We don't want to deal with that here. So the thing is, obviously, if you want to have creative ideas, there's two things you need to do. One, you need to bring a real diversity of notions together to formulate ideas, and that's where your diverse background helps. And anyone who has a diverse background in living and work, I think that's a huge advantage. You have to bring kind of diverse notions that would not conventionally be brought together, and bring them together to formulate ideas. Because I say stuff is organized in a fashion where similar notions are close to each other, and you've already put these together. All those ideas have been formed already. Um, and to really bring diverse stuff together in your mind. And secondly, you need to teach or train your mental bureaucrat, when you want to be creative, to do the opposite of what he usually does and reject conventional thinking in favor of unconventional thinking. Hence, anti-conventional thinking is a way of pushing the mind to be purposely unconventional, to kind of behave in a different way than it usually does. And things like brainstorming don't address this. The logic behind brainstorming is you shout out lots of ideas, you don't criticize any ideas, and people will initially say lots of conventional, boring ideas until they eventually run out of conventional, boring ideas, and then come up with creative ideas. But when I listen to this, the thing that comes to my mind is, imagine you're at a dinner party and you're sitting next to a guy who's telling really boring stories. Now, you could just listen to him tell boring stories in hopes that he eventually runs out of boring stories and starts telling you interesting stories. But I think we both know that's not going to happen. So you either have to get up and leave him, or maybe you've tied to your chair or something, you can't get up. You could try and provoke him to tell interesting stories. You could ask him really weird questions. If he's telling you a story about a really boring trip he had to I don't know where, you could say, well, what would you do if a tiger suddenly jumped into your hotel room and attacked you? Say something completely out of the blue, and that would probably force him to think differently and actually make his stories more different. And that's kind of what anti-conventional thinking is. It's kind of provoking people's minds to put unconventional notions together and to allow those notions to be expressed, to be shared with the group.
Yeah, so you didn't mention that you need to train the mental bureaucrat in order to function the reverse that its usual function is, right? So how do you train the mental bureaucrat?
Well, the main thing is people are not going to change on a permanent basis, and most people don't want to. They might think they do, but most people at our age have established themselves and work professionally and so on, and they don't really want to radically change the way their mind works, because that would radically change who they are. So basically, it's just a matter of basically telling yourself, instructing the mental bureaucrat, for the next hour while I'm doing this workshop or I'm trying to solve this problem, I'm going to learn to yeah, I'm going to not learn. I'm going to reject conventional ideas, and I'm going to let unconventional, crazy stuff through. In the workshops, I do this by basically prohibiting boring ideas. I make this very clear from the beginning when I do workshops or when I facilitate that no boring ideas are allowed. Um, in brainstorming, when people are working together to have ideas, criticism is absolutely forbidden. In anti-conventional thinking, not only is it allowed, but it's actually welcome. You're encouraged to criticize ideas. And the first rule of and there's three rules. The first rule of which is always criticize boring ideas. So basically, what you're doing is reinforcing again and again this notion that boring ideas, conventional ideas, are not wanted, and only the unconventional stuff is allowed. Interestingly, there's one other thing you can do, which is sort of an aside from anti-conventional thinking, is it seems that when people allow their minds to wander, for me, it tends to be when I go for a walk. For some people, it's when they take a bath or they, sit in the countryside and look at the scenery. Different people have different things they do to kind of just relax their minds and let their minds wander. When this happens, the mental bureaucrat becomes less active as well. And so this is why it's very often, this is why so many people say, oh, I have my best ideas when I go for a walk or when I take a bath, places like this. So that's also useful to know as part of, well, the way it's a part of anti-conventional thinking is in addition to whatever you're collaborating with in a group, get away, do what you need. And I also introduce meditation into anti-conventional thinking, which again helps kind of reduce the function of the mental bureaucrat.
So, and it all the same thing happens when you get drunk, right? So you lose
Yes,
your
indeed.
inhibitions. So I had a guest on my podcast a little while earlier. His name is Paul Castaigne, and he was talking about the fact that he's a trainer who trains sales teams. Okay,
Oh,
so I
yeah.
asked him, what is the first thing that you do when you're hired to train a sales team? And he said, the first thing that I do is to take them all and get drunk with them. And I asked him, why do you do that? And he says that that's when you really understand what the true problems are. It never happens that people do not know what the problems are. It's just that people do not come up and be open and honest about what the problems are. Once people get drunk, all those inhibitions are gone, and the real challenge, the real problem actually comes up. And it is also then that real ideas about how do you solve those problems also come up.
That's very true, and in fact, it's been I can't even think who's done the research, but that's actually at least one team has actually looked into that, and they have indeed found that people are more creative once they've had a few drinks. Obviously, there's a certain point in which it goes beyond creativity just to being stupid drunk, but there is actually quite a range, and yeah, it seems to be exactly that the mental bureaucrat becomes less active. People become less inhibited about what they say, and they say stuff they might not normally say in the office, and so on. That's probably also why a lot of really great ideas are written in the back of beer coasters.
And napkins.
And napkins, exactly. Far more often on napkins and beer coasters than on, say, memo pads in office meeting rooms. And I think there's a lesson to be learned here.
Yeah. So you did mention that there are three tenets of anti-conventional thinking. The first one you said is that absolute criticism of ideas is an absolute must. So what are the other two?
No, well, I may have not been clear. No, there's three rules to criticizing ideas in anti-conventional thinking.
Okay.
And so the first rule is that you always criticize boring ideas. The second rule is that yes, you criticize the idea, not the person. So it's okay to say that idea is boring, but it's not okay to say you are boring. And then the third one is that whenever you criticize an idea, you have to allow the person who had the idea or anyone else in the group to defend the idea. You can't just criticize, criticize, criticize. You have to shut up then and let people defend the idea.
And there are four steps or 3 or 4 steps that you talk about when you talk about using anti-conventional thinking and apply it to come up with innovations, right? So what are those? If you could just explain them a bit.
Yes, I'd be happy to. In fact, that's very important. I think if we're going to continue with anti-conventional thinking, yeah, break it down to a 3 to 4 step process. If it's a group, it's generally a 4-step process. The first step is to play with the situation. When you have a situation in which you want to have creative ideas, the mistake that most people make is they immediately try and have ideas, and they find that they can't be very creative. And if you go back to the model I gave you before, this is hardly surprising. If you have a problem or a goal or a situation where you want to have creative ideas, and you immediately start working on the ideas, you're only seeing a very kind of surface of a particular situation. You don't see it in any depth. You're not connecting it with other stuff in your mind, and so you're just basically limiting very much the number of notions you make available to your mind to have ideas. So the first thing you need to do is to play with the situation, to really bring it deep into your inner mind, especially if you're on your own. You bring it deep into your inner mind. As I think I said earlier, in my workshops, I often do a little lightweight meditation session, and where I put people in kind of a relaxed state, and then I have them visualize a situation in their mind and walk around it and fly over it and change the color of it, make it big and make it small. And I like animals. You probably noticed at some point I'll have some cats in the situation, or tell them, okay, how does your grandfather think about this situation? And that stuff is funny and kind of weird, but what it does is it makes people connect the situation to all kinds of stuff they don't normally do, and so you're creating a huge range of notions in your mind that you can use later when you have to come up with ideas, and you start to connect this situation not just on the surface, but you start to connect it to strange stuff. You might suddenly think, well, actually that connects to something that happened to me 3 years ago. It's not obvious, but now that I'm really looking at this in a new way. And very often people come up to me after a workshop and say, "That was incredible, Jeffrey. When you said, imagine 10 cats running around and playing in this situation," I suddenly thought, yes, something came to me that I'd never thought before. So it really does help, because and this seems to be what creative people do anyway, is that they're very good at kind of just playing with situations in their mind and bringing strange stuff to it. And as I said, then I also, if at all possible, I advise people to focus on the situation for a couple of days and get out and take a bath, go for a walk, whatever you have to do, and let the mind wander. Keep the situation in the back of your mind. You talk to people, do whatever you do, but let it kind of sit back there, because as your life goes on, as stuff happens, maybe you're just walking down the street and you see a child doing something, and somehow that connects to the situation and creates sparks. And of course, sometimes ideas come up here, and it's not wrong to have ideas. I mean, indeed, write them down, but don't focus on the ideas at this point. The second step, particularly if you're collaborating with a group, is to come up with what I call a sexy goal, so that people are kind of all, I guess, on the same page, as we like to say in business. So they're all kind of perceiving the situation in a similar way. And I like to tease people in brainstorming and creative problem solving and saying that, in anti-conventional thinking, we talk about goals, whereas in brainstorming creative problem solving, you talk about problems, and that's because problems are for losers and goals are for winners. And that almost always gets someone upset with me. Where was I? So yeah, and a sexy goal is basically formulating a goal statement in a way that makes people think about a situation differently than they instinctively do. And this again helps bring new thinking to the situation, as well as makes it harder for the mental bureaucrat to reject ideas. And an example, like I used in a speech last night, is imagine you're working at a company that makes digital cameras for taking snapshots, and you've been assigned to come up with the next generation digital camera. And of course, you're facing competition from mobile phones, which increasingly have better, excellent cameras in them. So instinctively, you might have a brainstorm or do some kind of session with a challenge. What new features could we introduce into our new telephone? The thing there is that makes you think about telephones, and your idea is going to be telephone-like. You probably think about higher resolution and special effects in the camera, blah, blah, blah. And that's not going to be terribly original. So what if you were to formulate this as, tell the team, describe to me a device that enables you to capture memories and share them, which is basically what people use a camera for. It's a snapshot camera. A professional photographer is a different story. But a snapshot camera, the camera in the mobile phone, people are basically trying to capture memories and share these memories with their friends. So if you get rid of the notion of camera and talk about the actual functionality of a camera, then this really, it allows people to really think a lot more broadly about this whole process from capturing to sharing. And it also then, the mental bureaucrat, you can't stop an idea and say, that has nothing to do with cameras. You can't, you know what I mean? So it really loosens people up. It makes it so much easier to have creative ideas. The the third step then is to build a creative vision. So unlike almost every other creative thinking methodology these days, in collaborative format anyway, it's not about coming up with a long list of ideas and choosing ideas later. It's about working together to build a big huge creative vision of what you want to do next. And basically you do this, and this is very much stolen from the way artists, writers, and so on collaborate in a project. And again, maybe I just did a talk on anti-conventional thinking last night. So some of these examples are fresh in my mind. Getting back to the artist, you imagine, say, a dance troupe wants to come up with a performance. You know, they have in 3 months' time, they need to do a performance. So the group gets together and they try and come up with ideas. Now, they don't make a long list of ideas and choose the best. Generally, people shout out ideas. Someone might say, let's do a dance performance of Romeo and Juliet. And someone else will say, oh, that's boring. There's been so many dance performances of Romeo and Juliet. If you want to do Shakespeare, let's do King Lear. There's never been a dance performance of King Lear. Someone else will say, King Lear, are you crazy? That's so depressing. Who wants to see a dance about King Lear? And someone else will say, let's get away from Shakespeare. How about a dance, two lovers at the end of the world? Well, that's kind of That's kind of depressing too, don't you think? No, no, no. It could be very beautiful. We could have, we have this desolate landscape and these two beautiful young people performing, and it's like an argumentative approach to come up with a big picture. And the advantage to this for the dance troupe is once they have this, then everyone can get to work right away. The set designer can start working on the set designs. The choreographer can start thinking about the dance. The music director can start working on the music, and so everyone can get to work immediately and build up from there. So it's basically the same notion. An anti-conventional thinking session is you kind of try out ideas, you see if they fit the situation. People criticize, you either accept the criticism or you don't. When something starts to work, then you build up and make it bigger and bigger. And the aim is to have a big, huge creative vision. And the advantage here, of course, is, you don't have to go back to this list of 100 ideas and choose the best ideas. You've got something that can work immediately, which on one hand is very positive, but this actually leads us to the fourth step. It's also kind of negative, because if you do you come out and you do a workshop and you're creative, you're having a good time, maybe even have a couple beers to loosen up. That's great. You have this wonderful creative vision, but then you go back to work, and you've worked in a lot of organizations. You know exactly what this is about. You go back to work, and on your computer you see 17,342 emails waiting for you, meetings, first meeting in 10 minutes, then in an hour later, hour later. Oh, and the boss wants a presentation before lunchtime, and you think, to hell with this. There's no idea. This creative vision seemed sexy last night, but I must say today it looks really intimidating and kind of scary. And I think that more than anything kills a lot of creativity in business. So the final step steals from personal development. And basically what you have to do is take this big, huge creative vision and break it into small pieces. It's very much like if you've ever read up on sort of personal development about achieving goals. If you have a goal up here, it can just seem intimidating. It's hard to know how to get there. So what you need to do is work out the steps you need to take from where you are now to the achievement of this goal. And once you've done that, then you just, okay, the goal, you don't want to think about the goal too much at that point. The goal is basically a destination, and you need to think about each step one boom, boom, boom at a time, and you tackle each step one at a time. If you're with a group, as is typically the case in business, then you also need to assign someone to take charge of each step, because if you don't do that, no one will take charge of each step. And there's some other stuff too that you can do to kind of make it easier to take this path. So that's basically the 4 steps of anti-conventional thinking, from a situation where you want to be creative to taking the steps to actually implementing the creative vision that you come up with.
So, and when you do these workshops, these are typically 1, 2, or 3 days. And do you do all 4 steps by the time you end the workshop? Because I've done workshops like these as well, not following what you're talking about, but something similar as well. But what happens is, at the end of the workshop, we have a list of topics that we would like to take up, and you also assign someone that, okay, you are responsible for this, you are responsible for this, but then nothing happens. So the last step that you're talking about seems so crucial and so critical. So do you make that as part of your workshop itself, or do they have to do it outside of your workshop?
Well, the reality, I mean, the ideal would be indeed for me to follow up with that, to have the workshop take place over a period of time. But the reality is most, I'm hired by businesses and occasionally governments to come in and typically do a 2-day workshop. Um, and so it's not really possible to do that, unfortunately. Um, so I give them the steps, I give them the instructions, I follow up, and yeah, the truth is, sadly, the ideas that are developed in the workshop, but sometimes it's also because the ideas developed in the workshop are more for testing out the system. Um, Half the time, yeah, things don't happen. Half the time, things do happen. But yeah, the ideal, of course, as you say, would be to create a scenario in which I'm following up, having follow-up workshops, say once a month for 6 months after the initial workshop. But the reality is, most businesses simply can't get their employees out for that much time over a consistent period for
Yeah.
something like this. And that also reflects on the true importance many organizations give to creativity and innovation.
Yeah, that was what I was about to say as well. So that brings me to this question as to what is innovation and what does it mean to be innovative? There's a lot of hype around innovation in the business circles. Is it really justified? Um, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I defined creativity before. It's bringing together diverse notions in your mind in order to come up with a notion that's novel and new to you. So that's creativity. In my mind, in the sense of business, innovation is implementing creative ideas in order to generate value, and typically that value is increased income or reduced
Cost.
costs, or a combination of both, ideally. A way of doing something that generates more income but actually costs you less than the old way to do it. But not always. I mean, it might also just be something that generates positive publicity. Like, I don't know if you've heard about this, but I guess Starbucks in America has recently offered free university tuition to all their employees. Okay, at some point down the line, there probably is a revenue benefit to that. But I think the values that they see are more in terms of educating employees, good publicity for the company, and so on. So that's an example of an innovation that's perhaps not an immediate bottom line value, but it still delivers value to the organization.
And the hype, you think innovation is really critical for organizations? And what are some of the organizations that you think are really innovative and creative?
Unfortunately, there's probably too much hype about innovation. And I think what you see in organizations sometimes is that they're desperately trying to be innovative without really thinking about what the innovation is about. And it's just something I wrote about a couple of years ago that got a lot of attention. If you look at the companies in the world that most of us perceive to be truly innovative, Apple's an obvious example. Apple, Facebook, Google. Um, you look at the corporate web pages of these companies, you very seldom see the word innovation anywhere. Apple in particular, you don't see the word innovation anywhere on the website. But then if you go to I don't know, Lenovo. Lenovo make great computers, no criticism there, but to my mind, they're not a leading innovator in the way that say Apple is. Um, and you look at Lenovo's website, and you see the word innovation all over the place. And I'm not picking on one company because I would say that 90% of big organizations these days have innovation all over their websites, their brochures, their annual reports, and so on. So it raises the question, well, why are the most innovative companies not actually talking about innovation? And I think that because they're very much focused on a corporate strategic vision. In the case of Apple, it's about making beautifully engineered, very desirable products that enable people to do certain things. And so they don't, for an organization like that, innovation is merely a tool to pursue this vision. Google, it's about indexing the world and probably being the world's largest advertising company. And again, through engineering, it's very much about engineering expertise at Google. So their focus again is on this stuff. So it's not about it's not being innovative. It's not purposely being innovative. It's using innovation as a tool to get to where they want to go. But often, and also I would guess, I don't know for a fact, but I guess that these companies probably do not have an innovation manager, a person with innovation manager on their name card, because they're so orientated towards working towards this vision. using innovation as a tool, they don't need an innovation manager. But you go to, typical bank, manufacturing company, service company. These days, more and more of them have someone who says, it's got innovation manager on their name card. And sometimes what I'm seeing is these people are focusing too much on innovation in order to be innovative. Another way of looking at it is I used to be in photography a long time ago, and you see these people. I remember you'd see people who had all these wonderful cameras, and they'd show off, these, great Nikons and Leicas and stuff that they have, but you'd have to see their photographs, and what, huh? It's all about the cameras. In a sense, innovation is like a camera. For a great photographer, it is merely a tool. A great photographer doesn't matter if it's a Nikon, a Canon, a Hasselblad, because it's the photographer's ability to use this tool to get the results that he needs at the end. And the same thing with organizations. Innovation really should just be a tool to get to the end. But a lot of companies are forgetting that and all this hype about innovation. I think one thing a lot of organizations could do, and I just wrote about that in Report 103, I think, is to stop talking so much about innovation and
Exactly.
start using innovation as a tool, start talking more about the corporate vision. There's another problem, of course. A lot of companies' corporate vision is to have the best products at the the cheapest prices. So maybe the first step is actually to craft a good corporate vision, and then to get the focus on this corporate vision rather than innovation.
You know what? This is not surprising, I would say. I was talking to Bob Thompson, who recently released a book called Hooked on Customers. We were talking about
Ah, yeah.
customer centricity and delighting customers and stuff like that. And the same theme came around there as well in that discussion, because some of the best companies which provide best customer service and delight their customers on a regular basis do not have delighting customers as one of their core core principles. It's just the way they
Right.
do business, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's just one way to reach whatever it is that they want to reach and deliver whatever it is that they want to deliver. The same, I think, is also with innovation. So though innovation is hyped, I think, in my opinion, uh, uh, if one set of companies can use innovation really well and use that as a competitive advantage, it is the small and medium enterprises, right? The
Oh, yeah.
startups of the world and the small businesses of the world, because they don't have the kind of resources that the large organizations have. They don't have the reach that the large organizations have. But the one thing that they have is speed and their ability to, or rather, the lack of baggage, if for the lack of better word,
Yeah.
to actually really come up with creative solutions and compete with these guys. So what are your thoughts on that? And how
Well, I
can
think
these
that's
companies can do actually?
well, I think that's very true. I mean, to be honest, for many big companies, their uh, true innovation policy is to find a small company that's done something really innovative and buy that small company. And I actually read somewhere an economic analysis of why that actually makes more sense for a big company. That to throw a lot of money at small projects, involves a lot of risk. Why not let entrepreneurs take on this risk, and then you find the companies that succeed and you buy them up? I mean, it seems like a huge amount of money you're paying, but you're avoiding risk in your organization. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And as you said, yeah, the real advantage small and medium-sized companies, especially small companies, have is flexibility, speed of action, lack of bureaucracy. Very often it's a single owner or a small team of owners who um, and very often, at least when it's a startup company, of course, one of the reasons these people have started the company is they believe they can do something better than the existing players can. So they already have this kind of notion that, this belief that they are innovating somehow within the current market. So, I mean, that's already where I think small companies can have their greatest innovative strength. Is yeah, it's getting launching off with a brand new idea. For companies that are already existing, I mean that can still be an advantage. It's sort of incredible flexibility to change. And I actually did this in Bangkok years ago. I ran a small company in the early 1990s when I was living in Bangkok that did marketing communications work. So the focus was doing brochures and sales kits and print advertising, mostly print advertising, print material. Then in 1994, I started noticing the internet and thought this was really cool and played around with it. Initially, I saw it more as a communications tool, but then the web was also starting to grow up. And at one point, I said I could continue to run a perfectly fine marketing communications company in Bangkok amidst about 100 competitors also have perfectly fine marketing communications companies, ranging from advertising bureaus to freelancers. Or I could take a chance and turn my company into one of Thailand's first ever internet, web design development, multimedia development companies. And I took that chance, and that was a very wise, choice in the end. It was a bit of a struggle, but we were one of the first. Got a lot of free publicity. The newspapers, I was periodically being called up by reporters, being interviewed on television, radio for people who wanted my feedback on what was happening on the web. It helped that I was fluent in Thai too, so you sort of have this crazy foreigner who could speak Thai in these interviews. But it was a fact that we did that. Now, no big company could really, well, very rarely could a big company make such a huge turnaround in what they're doing, basically based on the decision of one guy or even a small team. But small companies can do this. So one thing I think is to identify a trend very early on, because I think although a lot of people saw this internet was a fascinating thing around 1994, 95, 96, no, I think very few people, certainly not me, had any idea what it would become today. Although in retrospect, it's not hard to see how this has happened. So yeah, small companies can often identify trends before they become apparent and before they become big trends and jump on them, and that's one way they can innovate. I think another exercise, if you have a small company and you want to start a company, I think a great exercise you can do is look at assumptions in the marketplace of your expertise, because all businesses are really caught up in assumptions. And I mean, we all are. We have these assumptions, and photography is a good example. This gets down to what's the word? Disruptive innovation. If you look at photography, you had 20 years ago, Kodak was a giant. You also had Ilford, you had Fuji, you had a lot of companies involved in the photography business. And digital photography started coming up. It started happening. And all these companies assumed that digital photography would get nowhere because in those days the quality of a digital photograph was very poor, and there's no way you could print it. This was the assumption they're making. There's no way you could print it and have a decent looking image. And yeah, let's face it, the early digital cameras are crap. I mean, I don't know if you used a camera like in the 90s, but you push the shutter down, it would take 5 seconds before the picture happened. If you're trying to capture emotion, yeah, what was there? And this was in exchange for 2 megapixel image. But photography's come a long way, but the assumption that the photography makers were making was people cared about quality and printing. They didn't. It goes back to what I was saying before. Aside from the professionals, photography. Sorry?
I said they cared about the memories.
Yeah, exactly. They care about capturing the memories and sharing the memories. And these days, particularly with things like Facebook and Pinterest and so many other Instagram, it's so much easier to share memories, but it would be really difficult to do that with an old print, camera. So these companies remain, and convinced, they got caught up in their assumptions. This is almost always the case with disruptive innovation. And I think one thing that you can do if you want to start something new is to look at the assumptions in an industry of your area of expertise, because big companies fail to see these. And as an example, I did a workshop a few months ago with a large conglomerate, and I was working with some people in the logistics department. I asked them, what are the assumptions you are making? And they said things like, well, our trucks will run on time, and they really had a difficult problem. And I actually had one guy up front of the group, and I said, well, a couple other assumptions come to my mind. I mean, what happens if diesel fuel becomes unavailable? He just looked at me and laughed. I said, well, what about 3D printing? What if we reach a stage in which 3D printers could actually print objects, and we don't need trucks to ferry them around? This was in Arabia. We don't need trucks to ferry these things around. And he just looked at me and laughed, and I'm sure he thought I was completely crazy. For him, he was so firm in these assumptions that people would always buy products, and these products would have to be delivered by trucks in his continent, that he could not perceive of this disruption. So this is where a few guys bored at work, want to start their own business with expertise in logistics could do is really question what are the assumptions being made by the logistics world today that could be completely disrupted by three guys like us with a crazy idea. Because a small company can do that. They can come up, they can launch this thing, and yeah, and a big company would find it much harder to do. So I think it's one of the most powerful exercises a small company can do is to really just look at the assumptions in the field of expertise. And I'm thinking of people who maybe want to start a business but don't know what to do with it. I mean, people who already have a vision probably already have innovative ideas. They don't need this kind of advice. I'm thinking of just the people who want to start something new, or somebody in an existing small company who's feeling a bit lost. And I think the thing you can do is ask him or herself, or better still, ask other people, and try to identify what are the assumptions being made in this industry, and which of those can I break apart and become a disruptive innovator.
Yeah. So I've tried doing this with some of the participants in workshops that I have run so far, and I
Mm-hmm.
found that it is very, very difficult for people to identify those assumptions.
Yeah.
They struggle a lot, and probably one or two guys might come up with one or two assumptions that the industry is operating on. So, would you what would you do in such a situation? I mean, how do you get people to actually identify those assumptions? So is there something that you do? Is there something that you get them to think about? Is it just a process of exploration and reflection? So what do people do in order to actually identify these assumptions?
That's a problem, and to be honest, I do not have at this point an easy way to do it. I typically make my own suggestions, and I think that's probably the best thing you can do is bring outsiders in to look at an industry, um, because yeah, I think once the more enmeshed you become in an industry, the more these assumptions seem like laws as opposed to assumptions. And I do think it's very hard because, as I said, in this case, not only could this guy not come up with nor the teams come up with assumptions for the industry, but when I actually said some crazy stuff like this, they thought it was crazy. You know, they, they just couldn't believe it. And if we go back to the example I gave before, interestingly, Kodak was actually one of the pioneers in digital imagery. They actually had it in their hands, but they didn't see any value in it because, again, they were caught up in these assumptions. Um, so I think that probably the thing you need to do is bring other people in, maybe get some creative young people fresh out of school who haven't actually been had all their assumptions hammered in to their minds already, and get them to kind of think about the assumptions. Yeah, maybe get a science fiction writer, someone like that. Ask this person how you might perceive the future of this industry. Yeah, there's not so far. I have not found an easy way to do this. I will continue, of course, to experiment because I do think this is an incredibly powerful way to build ideas. It's also a very powerful way that businesses uh, can be prepared for potential disruptive innovators that could, destroy their business. As Kodak recently went bankrupt. I mean, tens of thousands of people have lost their job at Kodak. Now, hopefully, they found jobs elsewhere. But I mean, it's huge when this kind of thing
I think
happens.
it's a good book idea actually. If you can find a process through which you can actually test and come up with the assumptions under which an industry operates, and if you are able to do it consistently across industries, I think that's a brilliant book. It could be.
I think so. I've made a note to play with that one a bit more. I have a group in Brussels that we do the Imagination Club. We try out experimental workshops, so I may do something there, try and get some ideas
Yeah.
together
So
and test them there.
in fact, I looked at that the website there, and I was actually intrigued. What do you guys do in these workshops? So maybe if you can just spend a couple of minutes on that, and then we can probably come back to the conversation that we were having.
Okay. The Brussels Imagination Club is something that my good friend Andy Whittle and I set up about 8 years ago. And basically what it is a platform for facilitators and trainers to experiment. So the idea is experienced trainer facilitator like myself or Andy, or many others has a crazy idea. You don't want to take it to paying clients. you want to see how it works first, you take it to the Imagination Club, and we have a mailing list of about 350 people, all nationalities who live in the Brussels area, and typically anywhere from 15 to 30, sometimes even 40 people come to a workshop. Then the facilitator has 90 minutes to do the workshop, and there's a feedback session at the end. So from the facilitator's perspective, it's an excellent way to try out new ideas with a receptive, intelligent audience. First, just see how people respond to things, and secondly, then you get this feedback session at the back, which at the end rather, that you can use to develop the ideas further. For the audience, it's a good opportunity to try out new things, meet new people. The international community in Brussels is a chance to meet new people. In addition to experienced facilitators, we also sometimes have people who just want to get into the business of training or whatever, and they just want to try out their skills in the first place. So topics are all over the place, from pure creativity to happiness to last week we had a workshop on strategy. We have some more what I call new age stuff. Someone did a workshop on color therapy a while back. So it's really all over the place, from sort of scientific, slightly businessy stuff to like I say, this kind of new age stuff. It tends to focus more on personal development. It's not a business group. It's not a business networking group that are cropping up all over the place. It's really a place for people to improve themselves, to learn and meet other people as friends rather than as potential business contacts.
Interesting. So coming back to the discussion that we were having about challenging some of the assumptions, you mentioned that it's a good idea to bring in an outsider. It's a good idea to bring in someone who is not as deeply immersed in the assumptions of the industry. So I think it can only be done by the leader in the organization, because I don't think an innovation manager or anyone else actually can go out and pull out those things. So that brings to me the question as to what role does a leader in the organization play in an innovation project?
The leader of the organization, I think it's critical for the leader of the organization, the CEO, the managing director, whoever, to demonstrate a true interest in innovation. Not just say innovation is our company's #1 priority, but actually, to participate in the innovation program. I've had a couple of workshops where the managing director, the president of the company's actually participated, and that's been great, because that shows that this guy's actually interested in what's happening in the organization, interested in creativity and innovation. It helps again for this person to be very vision orientated and to be willing to try out new things to get to to move towards that vision. One of the interesting things about a lot of innovation managers I meet is very often they have a fairly direct contact with the CEO, because often the CEO or a very high level person has put them in charge of innovation. So even in a large company where you might have to kind of go through several layers of direct reporting to get to top management, the innovation manager often has a kind of a hotline to the top management. So that's one nice thing about working with innovation managers, is they often can get approval faster than if you're working with the assistant director of marketing or something like that. But yeah, it's ultimately critical for the CEO, whoever, to really demonstrate interest in innovation. I think to be pushing towards a creative a corporate vision that's not kind of generic, but actually is relevant. As I said, with Apple, Google, Facebook, organizations like that, to participate in activities. Perhaps then the more subtle stuff is to actually give the innovation manager some budget. Now this is better now than it used to be. I'd say 5-10 years ago, often someone was assigned innovation manager and told to do some stuff, but they had no budget. Now, not only is it very hard to do anything with no budget, but that also kind of demonstrates how serious the CEO is actually taking this whole innovation thing. These days, fortunately, well, very fortunately, because this is often where my fees come from, more and more CEOs are giving their innovation managers budgets to do stuff like workshops with me, but also then maybe indeed through a facilitator like me or whatever, they could bring in as a consultant someone from outside who could bring some crazy um, ideas to the organization. Um, what else is important? Allowing people to take risks. Again, you come across organizations which explicitly or inexplicitly have this kind of rule. Failure will not be tolerated in our organization. And if people are afraid, and I don't think I need to explain this, it's so apparent. If people are afraid that, uh, or know that if they fail, they will be reprimanded, then they're not going to take chances. They're going to do stuff that's very safe. And inevitably, creative ideas, potential innovations involve risk. And as a kind of a rule of thumb, the more potentially innovative an idea is, the greater the risk is. I mean, if it succeeds, an example would be, you have an idea. Let's use digital cameras. You have an idea to improve the resolution of the lens on your digital camera from, or the not the lens, the thing that captures a picture. So maybe it's a 10 megapixel camera now, and you've got an idea to make it a 12 megapixel camera. That's easy. That's pretty low risk. You just have to rejig a few bits and pieces in the factory. So there's not really any risk there. Now, if you have a kind of a radical idea to completely transform digital cameras, um, uh, I don't know. You have a robotic cat that can take pictures through its eyes. Um, Best I could do in short notice. And
No,
you want to introduce this. Sorry?
Yesterday I wrote a blog post where I suggested that universities should probably stop doing what they are doing and instead become gym similar to gym memberships, where you take a membership for life,
Ah,
and
yeah.
the fees should not be upfront and should be at a monthly fee, low fee. Every year increase it by 5% or 10%. So as their ability to pay more or increases, you charge them more, and you keep these members or students for life. They can come back and do a course every year if they want to. If they don't want to, so be it, but if they want to, they can always come back and do a course every year, and give
Excellent.
the ability for an organization to actually sponsor that. And when I published that, I have a professor who is a friend of mine. He
Hmm.
comes back and he tells me that what the hell have you written? I mean, have you gone mad or something?
Indeed, I can imagine. Yeah, well, I think it's a great idea. I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. And yeah, I spoke at a TEDx thing last night, and one of the people was actually talking about changing education. He was actually not saying the same thing, but the part of his talk was, yeah, education more and more is like a continuous thing. It's not something that finishes once you get your degree, but it should be
Exactly.
an ongoing thing, and that very much connects to what he was saying. Um, but yeah, getting back to where I was, if you have a really radical, like I say, you want to like have a little robotic cat that follows orders and takes pictures with his eyes and sends those pictures automatically to Facebook and everything. Yeah, that could be a killer idea. That could make a fortune if it became a trend. But in order to make that, you're going to have to completely rejig your factory. You're going to have to invest. It's going to cost you millions and millions just to get that first one um,
Out.
on the street, and you have no idea. You could become a laughing stock for it. So this is the problem when you have really crazy ideas like that. They're hugely expensive to implement, and because they're new and untested, it's a lot harder to make any kind of realistic projection of the idea's potential. So, what managers have to do is come up with to demonstrate a willingness to perhaps allow a certain percentage of budget to be used towards testing crazy ideas like this. I mean, yeah, you don't actually have to go all the way and produce this. You could probably, yeah, get the technicians to make a small sample and play with it or something like that. What some organizations have done is created a skunk works. As you probably know, a skunk works is like a small
Lab,
autonomous
maybe.
division of a company, a lab basically, where people within the company, within this skunk works, are allowed to fail basically a lot more than other people in the company. So they're encouraged to try out crazy ideas, to test them out. They have a budget. They're not expected to be profitable or anything like that. And the aim, of course, here is hopefully by allowing some really creative people the latitude to be really creative, maybe 9 out of 10 things will fail, but that one thing that really succeeds could make the company a fortune. So it's getting involved in stuff like that that allows organizations to take risks, because once the CEO can do that, I think that's one of the most powerful things that she can do to really give people the freedom to not only think creatively, but to try out these creative ideas and test these creative ideas.
So if I have to sum up all that you've just said, I think it all boils down to two things actually. One is uh, uh, to not only allow people to fail and also to build a culture of innovation and everything that goes around with it, right? So
Indeed.
yeah, so my podcast is actually called Pushing Beyond the Obvious, right? So what do you think there are critical aspects of innovation process that are not very obvious when you look at it at the start, but can have a large impact on the success or failure of these projects?
Yeah, there's something I can tell you which I think will surprise you. Um, that is probably the most important, art, maybe the most important piece of research associated with creativity and innovation that I've come across in the past few years. It is readily available, but most people don't know this. Um, and it's absolutely fascinating for that. Because, yeah, you were talking about innovation. We've talked about how important CEOs say innovation is. Innovation, basically, as I said, is the implementation of creative ideas. And indeed, um, CEOs, managers are talking more and more about creativity now than they used to. Creativity used to be something arty-farty that that the designers did, but not something that real business people did. But now businesses are saying, well, we want more creative people who can sort of solve problems and come up with innovations and so on. And this has all been bandied about and blah blah blah. So what's fascinating about this research is they found out that people actually do not like creative ideas. That's right. People do not like creative ideas. It's some research that was done by University of Pennsylvania, Cornell, and one other university. Um, and yeah, they basically looked at did some studies. They looked at previous studies, and they found that people associated creative ideas with words like vomit and agony. That people really dislike creative ideas. They've looked at reports. They found that we go back to the brainstorming. If a manager has like a list of 50 ideas that were generated in a brainstorm or an idea management software, she will almost inevitably choose a slightly creative idea over a really creative idea. And it's not because she's consciously saying, I don't want this crazy idea. I want something kind of moderately. Probably internally she's saying, okay, well, this idea is too complicated. This idea is easy to implement. Who knows? Teachers apparently tend to least dislike their most creative pupils. You look at hiring practices in companies. They explicitly say we want creative employees. But if you actually do these tests where you create like two CVs that are identical but slight changes one over the other and see who gets called up for an interview, and those CVs in which a person's obviously more creative than the other person are less likely to be hired. So what it comes down to is people do not like creative ideas. And when you think about that, that just kind of smashes apart this whole creativity innovation thing. So why is that? I think the study looked more at what was happening as opposed to why it was happening, although some assumptions were made and marginally tested. Probably the most important thing is people do not like change over which they have no control. And innovation is usually change over which people have no control. If in a big company the boss comes in and says, we've got an innovative new way to improve efficiency of the production line by 50%, a lot of people are going to think, holy cow, uh, is this going to cost me my job? At best, someone's job is going to be completely redone. Someone who takes pride in having established himself in the organization and doing a good job. Does this mean that I'm going to have to completely give up what I'm doing and change all the processes I do? Or worse, does this mean I'm going to lose my job because 50% improvement in efficiency probably means that a lot of people are going to get fired? So people really do not like change over which they have no control, and innovation usually involves that. And I think, and I've seen this myself in organizations. I think if you reflect, you probably have too. If somebody comes into an organization with a crazy idea, often people will be very critical of the idea. And I think it's because, oh, that won't work here. not the way we normally do things. Our customers would hate that, and um, that's I think that we tend to assume that's because people organizations are conservative. They blah blah blah. The truth is people are scared. They're
So
scared that this transition is going to disrupt them.
yeah. So I have this saying, that all creative ideas are kind of dumbed down to the lowest
Yeah,
common denominator and then implemented. And then people always complain that we don't have creative ideas. And it's kind of a dichotomy actually, that on one side people do want say that at least they do want creative ideas, and once you get a creative idea and by the time it actually gets implemented, it is so diluted, and it
yeah,
actually again conforms to the shape and type that you would get without having gone through all the crazy process that you went through to come up with a really creative idea.
exactly. That's very true. Yeah. I think the other thing is people don't like
Yeah.
highly creative people. This was also shown in the research is really creative people often tend to question stuff. They want to change things that work just fine. They tend to be disruptors. So in addition to not liking creative ideas, people tend to dislike the highly creative people, which is why they don't get jobs and so on. So all of this actually makes it extremely hard to be innovative. But that is the huge advantage, going back to what we said before, to small companies, because it's not everyone's like this. You get crazy people like you and I who enjoy new ideas. We thrive on change and so on. A small company with a small team who are really into change and hire kind of enthusiastic young people, they don't have that fear that slows down the big competitors. So I think it's a huge advantage that a small company has.
Yeah, so I would just like to come back to the book that you wrote, The Way of the Innovation Master, right? So
Hmm.
I read through. I must admit that I did not read the book yet, but I have read through
Here.
what the book is about
Hmm.
and the kind of format that you've written. So if you could just spend a few minutes on the book itself, what it contains, and the format, and why you chose the particular format that you've written the book in.
Okay. Well, the book was written in 2010, so it's a few years, and I have a very bad memory. Um, the format of the book was a bit strange. The business book goes. It was combined a narrative of a woman who comes to me, and then I take her up the what's called the
The
Mountain of
Temple of
Innovation.
Yeah, the
Temple
Temple
of
of
Ideas. That's right.
Temple of Ideas.
Temple of Ideas at the top of a mountain. And so we have this kind of journey up the mountain, and a lot of sort of metaphors for innovation, challenges that we face going up the mountain that she faces and has to solve, that are sort of metaphors for innovation. And then there was a dialogue between two old, very, very sort of British, old school company presidents. Again, one of whom has implemented an innovation process in his companies, and the other one hasn't. And um, they had this kind of back and forth dialogue, and that concept was kind of stolen from the old Greek dramas, in which you would have like the gods having discussions about what was happening in the drama. And then lastly, it was a series of short articles, many of which I confess were basically re-edited Report 103 articles, offering advice um, to people for setting up basically an innovation process in a medium to large company. As to why I wrote it that way, I guess because I needed to have fun writing it was a big part of it. And to me, just to write a rather dull business book with endless advice and case studies and so on wouldn't be very fun. And I think, you know, as I hope you see talking to me and seeing Report 103, I like to have fun. So I had to have fun writing it. And I think putting this narrative in and putting the dialogues in were fun. But I also felt that they kind of reinforced ideas. So it wasn't like you just read how to do something and maybe a case study related to it. You actually had, like I said, a metaphor, an allegory in this climb up the mountain, and you had these old men sort of talking about it in a slightly funny way. But often one of the two old men um, would ask stupid questions that I would hope would be funny, but people could then sort of associate. Well, yeah, we've asked these questions in our organization too. So it wasn't purely a matter of having fun. It was trying to kind of reinforce ideas and get people thinking differently through these three strands of the book.
And actually, it kind of breaks the barrier of what a business book should look like, right?
I like
That
to think
itself
so.
is.
Yeah.
So the book that I wrote about is about entrepreneurship, and I have also chosen to write it as conversation between two guys,
Oh, cool.
one being a guru and one who's trying to learn, and the kind of dialogue that these guys have about different things. And yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun doing that as well.
Great.
So I kind of completely relate to the fact that it should be fun to write as well. Otherwise, it's a very boring and a very how do I put it? Very dull thing to do, which is to sit down and write, type on a PC.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So Jeffrey, I think we are run out of our time. I should say thanks a lot for spending this time with us. If you could just let us know where people can connect with you, that'll be really nice.
Okay, the easiest thing to do is to find me on my website, which is jpb, Jeffrey Paul Baumgartner.com. There's a lot of articles there. There's a lot of information about anti-conventional thinking there, and there's contact information for me there at jpb.com.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeffrey. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a great pleasure for me too. Thank you very much indeed.